Hey there. I can't believe we're on week 45 of the Chakra Wisdom Toolkit journey, and that's the deck behind me. And it's really interesting, when I think of this fable, when I think of Bahana Beige, and for some reason, that particular fable, it resonates so deeply with me. And it always has. And I think it's because in the seventh chakra, which in this deck I'm calling neutrals, which when the deck came about, it really made sense that the colors of the purple, those purple colors, which really should be the sixth chakra of indigo, right? All of the purples ended up in the sixth chakra. So for me, what made a lot of sense was by the time we got to spirit, which is the seventh chakra, it's above us, the crown. By the time we got there, everything was neutral. And what's really fascinating, and I want you to notice this in these final 7 weeks, that this journey has been about getting us to that place of neutrality, seeing really what it means to not take sides, to really just observe. So one of the things you're going to notice in every single one of these fables, and if you read the cards, you'll notice that too, that, excuse me, here I go again. I haven't yawned since the last time I did a video, but every single one of these particular fables, these last 7, are really taking on the tone of the neutrality of spirit. And so what that means is when we really look at God, higher power, spirit, there's no judgment. There's no meaning. It's just, it is what it is. So you're going to notice here that the stories in the fables themselves, they really have that tone of telling you what's happening without saying what's right or wrong. And I think you're going to be able to really determine the impartiality of seeing both sides in these fables, unlike any other fable before. Now, when I say that about the neutrality, what I'm really talking about is that, unlike the other fables where we could see if we were part of that or part of this, and we could kind of place ourselves in it, what begins to happen here is you're going to notice that you are in your neutral observer and you're observing some of these circumstances. And you may notice that in them, you are more of an observer than a judge. So that's the important takeaway, I feel, with the fables in general and with these in particular. It's really about being more of the observer. So let's begin. So with Bahana Beige really kind of came to me as I want to say she really came across, it was the idea of her being a dictator that was so bizarre to me, because, when we think of a dictator, we think of this negative thing, right? But in this sense, it was using a word that was antithetical to what we thought it should be. So it was kind of throwing us off right at the beginning. And when it says a wise dictator, it's kind of like oxymoron. But you know what? It's really not. When we look at it in a broader sense, you're going to begin to see that Bahana really has the ability to step back and let us decide which way we're going to go. And is there a higher energy than we are deciding in the moment? So sometimes, in particular here, it really is, you're going to see the two sides. And then with Bahana, what happens is you're going to get the ability to go, wow, how can I rise above something petty, if you will? And how important is it? I think really if I relanguage that and say not so much petty, but really asking ourselves, how important is it? How important is it that we take this side? Is it important? And sometimes it is. Sometimes we have to take a stand. And this is the point when we really enter the place of no boundaries, because as that spiritual energy, right? Because the universe is vast. It's not so much I'm going to put a boundary up and this is mine. It's more, I know what's acceptable to me and what isn't. And so that is not going to enter into my world. So there is an internal an internal wisdom of knowing what you're attracting into your life and what you will and won't accept. So let's take a look at Bahana. So the first thing that we notice with this fable, of course, is that the key word in the card is impartiality. And impartiality is really, and I don't think I even pulled the cards out, to be honest. I'm like, uh-oh, I don't have the deck. I'll pull them out now. The thing about Bahana Beige that makes this very different is that, oh, it's a new deck. Look at this. Okay, cool. All right, I love that. A new deck at the end. That's cool. So, of course, just like I did with the tarot deck, with my newest deck, with this deck, you're going to notice they're in chakra order. And I think being in chakra order gives us a new way of perceiving something, which is why any new deck that I do is going to be in I want to say an antithetical to what we think it should be, brain, and yet it's done intuitively. So I want you to really kind of take that on of like, oh, this has been a journey through my intuition. Okay, so Bahana Beige, whoop, whoop, whoop. I'm like not gonna, you know what? I have to figure out how to show something so that it's not looking reversed. That'll be an interesting journey because they do that on TV. Why can't we do it on video? All right, so this week's focus, and this is originally, as I said to you, the quote from the angel or the spirit, and this is key. I quietly listen, allowing you to color your palette. And I think what becomes important there is we are choosing what our world will look like. And that's what this fable ultimately is about. No matter which part you're playing, whether you're playing Mr. Green, Mrs. Blue, or Mr. I forget, but blue or green, or you're playing Bahana, you're going to be able to see the different roles in this fable very clearly. And I really feel that at one time or another, we've played every single one. The idea is not that we don't make mistakes, not that that errors don't happen. It's that we're able to come back and correct any errors that we may have created in the past. So that's kind of like what I call course correcting, right? We're on this course and we just correct it because we really want to shift it. And that is actually the power of our chakra. So the message this week, it says this week as we enter the neutral chakra, remember I said it is actually considered violet, but we call it in this work neutral. We focus on the concept of impartiality over the next few days. Whenever you encounter resistance in your life, take a moment to argue for the opposition. In other words, take a stand for the views that are against your own. To really understand a situation, you need to listen openly to the other side. So this is a powerful technique of, if you are in an argument. See, here's the difference. A conversation is when I kind of take my own inventory and say, this is what I feel I'm doing wrong here. And then you get to say, yeah, I feel I'm doing this wrong. That's a conversation. An argument is when I tell you what you're doing wrong and you tell me what I'm doing wrong. And the idea here is what would happen if I stepped into your shoes and I looked at things and argued for your position. An argument shuts down pretty quick when someone agrees with you. So, and sometimes an argument can go on because the other person hasn't recognized yet that that you're on their winning team. And that's a whole different, that's a different course, but that's something to consider as well. Now it says Tori's tip. The key here is self-discipline. Being neutral requires strength and a lot of personal energy. It's much easier to sometimes jump right in and try to figure out a situation immediately, rather than wait calmly for the participants to resolve it themselves. And I think that, as a card reader, and so much of what I've learned in terms of energy in my life has been through working with others in terms of their own wisdom and waiting for that outcome. Sitting there with the card, with the person, sharing what I see, and then silence. Because in the silence, it gives the person I'm talking to the opportunity to come up with their own wisdom, what's coming from them, what is coming within, and to an external conversation. So as I say that to you, I really want to underscore the idea that everyone has their own answer. And Bahana Beige reminds us that people will resolve things on their own if we let them. Now, where we get into trouble in our lives is when we push an issue and we go, I've got to know the answer. I've got to find out this second. Because it is that old thing of like, if I have to know now, it's my will. If it can wait a week, it's God's will. So that's really the conversation and where we are when we step into this first week of impartiality. So one of the things you get to practice this week, which is kind of fun, is the technique I teach a lot of neutral observer, really sitting back and going, that's interesting. Well, what do you mean? It's just interesting. I don't, in other words, if something happens, and just to give you an example, if you get a letter from a company with perhaps the initials IRS, if you're American, and, the old thing is like, instead of singing a high pitch and freaking out, you can kind of look at it and notice, oh, that's interesting. I'm experiencing panic. I'm in panic. I notice that I'm doing this. Okay, that's interesting. Now I'm going to do my dishes and I'm going to follow the next intended step with what needs to happen here. And that's what this is about. It's about being able, it's not that things won't happen to us. It's not that we can live this woo life. It's that when they happen, we know they won't kill us and we have the tools to step through to the other side. And I think that's in many ways, that's the beauty of the first lesson in Bahana Beige. And if you remember right from week 1, I really talked about how each of the 7 cards, the 7 fables, as we start this first fable in the seventh, I want to say this 7-week session, right? This 7-week part. As we start this final fable, we're also looking at the final fables. This first fable has the first chakra energy in it. So it really is that this fable is going to be the foundation for how and the tools you can use in your life of maintaining a neutral position. And when I say neutral, that doesn't mean you don't have feelings. It simply means that you may not act on them immediately, and that's the key, is that sometimes we wait. Sometimes I'll sit, and even when I'm doing a private session with somebody and I'm looking at a card or we're discussing something, sometimes I'll just sit quietly with them. Because when I sit quietly, I can figure out and feel what's going on with me. And then from there, because you see, the energy comes through me, not to me. So it's not my energy, it's a shared energy. And that's why sometimes people go, oh, that's phony. Well, because it's not something I'm like saying, it's not something from me per se, it's a filter through me. But when I sit and wait for the outcome, I may have something that will be accurate for you to hear, and then find your own conclusions from that. So let's take a look here. The first impression of Bahana Beige is this, and this is the key to this. Rarely do we trust others to put themselves back on track without interference. One of the favorite things I heard years ago, and it always stayed with me. There's a friend of mine, she and her husband were married at the time, many years ago. They were already married like 20 years. And so now it's probably 40, but I think it's like 39 or 40. But the point is that I remember saying to her, you married a great guy. And he's a great guy. He's a great guy. And she said, my husband is a great guy. And I want to tell you that he has given me everything I've ever wanted. And I just went, like, wow. And then I went, oh, and I'm listening. And she says, but never when I wanted it. And there was such power in that, because it was the idea that people they come to their own higher good in their own time. And I think that if we go back to what we learned in the impatience card with in the blue chakra, we really look at that when we force something, we lose the magic of the moment. And so the lesson here in being neutral and allowing someone to sink or swim on their own, I think what I said to somebody once was, I said, let this person reveal themselves to you. Stop trying to make them more or less. Just let them be who they are, and then you can see who they are. But I think we put so much on the idea of having something that is, quote, meaningful. Sometimes we endow things with meaning that they don't have, and therefore we put higher expectation on that situation. Okay, so in this fable, we discover what it means to be a conduit of spirit, remaining involved with others, but remaining open to them finding their own solutions. And by the way, that really is, I remember my dad said years ago, to be a good parent is to risk having your kid hate you. And, I think it was a Betty Davis quote actually that he quoted, but it's really true. And we have to risk being ourselves. We have to risk being unhappy, because to ultimately find that ability to be with ourselves and live with ourselves, we have to be able to let others live with themselves. And the consequences, whatever they are, may be good, but it may not be in the timeline I want. So that means if I'm focused on my life and doing what I need to do, I may be able to say to you, I kind of like your point of view. Let's do it your way. Let's do it that way. It sounds good to me. And I found myself saying that a lot with people, and they'll go, oh, because it's so interesting. And I'm going to share this, and then I'm going to give you an exercise. Years ago, I got to work with a woman who was just delightful. She ended up being my marketing person, and she was originally from Ghana and just really sharp. And it was very interesting because when we started, we had very different opinions on certain things, not everything, but she'd say, I think it needs to be this way. And I go, I think it needs to be this way. And she would go into, and I noticed she escalated, like it would be like, no, it has to be this way, and this is why, and really fighting for her opinion, not her opinion, but her point of view. And I would listen, and I'll never forget, I listened, I thought, oh. And she, said it again. She goes, oh, it has to be like this. I said, I think you're right. I think it should be that way. And she's like, that's it? I went, what do you mean? She goes, that's it? You just think it should, what? Wait a minute. Did you just agree with me? And I said, yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a good way of doing it. And I completely trust you. And I think it should be done that way. You're right. The entire friendship, relationship, work relationship dynamic changed because she suddenly understood that her opinion, her thought was valuable. And if I agreed or disagreed, it wasn't against her. It was just that I had something else in mind, but it didn't mean hers wasn't good. And ultimately, many times it was. But over time, we learned not compromise, because there's a difference between compromising or settling and looking for the highest good. Because I would say, is this the best choice? And we'd look at each other and go, neither one is right now. And sometimes we had to wait. But the point I'm making is that that's what Bahana is. Bahana Beige. And so this week is, am I making the choices that are the best for me in this moment? Because I'm going to share something with you. Unless you're dealing with a small child, really making decisions outside of my world is really, parenting is a different animal. All right. So I'm not going to say that, but even that, giving children the opportunity to make decisions and guiding is also part of this. So here's the thing I want to say. We're going to talk about setting your intention, and I'm going to touch on one thing, and then we're going to wrap up. The intention this week, this fable outlines the difference between sympathy and empathy. When we sympathize, we often become emotionally involved and offer advice. Sympathy implies that the other person doesn't know how to handle their problems and needs us. When we empathize, we empower the other person by supporting them in their feelings, trusting that they have everything they need to solve their own challenges. And this week, notice whether you're offering advice or support to others. Set your intention to observe how empowered people feel when you empathize rather than advise. And I would really like to leave you with that thought, because that is one of the most powerful things that I feel my work is about. That, supporting and allowing people the space to find their own solutions. And think about your life. What can you do this week to not so much get in there and help or fix or advise, but really listen to what the other person is saying and what their needs are? I have a thing with my friends, and it goes like this. Sometimes I'll be like, do you have a minute for me to rant? Because my dog is enjoying a ball. Do you have a minute for me to rant? And they'll be like, okay. And I'll go, I don't want to be fixed. I just want to say some things that are on my mind. And then we can, I'd like to discuss. She said, sure. It's usually what it is. And so a lot of times I'll just say something and I'll go, okay, thank you for listening to that. I just needed to share that. And then we'll discuss it in a neutral place, not so much of what I should do, but how that experience is. Now, as I say this to you, I want to be clear. The first thing I always ask people when they come at me with something I need to share, I need to talk about, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Do you want me to give feedback of what I'm experiencing, or do you want me to just hold the space and listen? That is so valuable. And I'm telling you, if we just spent a few more minutes every day listening, I think we'd have a lot more internal peace. So when you look at Bahana Beige this week, I really encourage you to look at each segment. You're going to see how the color of beige influences us in Tuesday, and the journal journey, finding your own personal inspiration with this. And of course, something I always feel that is extremely vital with this work is the solo exercise to do on your own, or the group exercise to do in a group. And as I say that to you, I really would like to be super clear and say, some of us like to do this with other people. For me, growing up the way I did with the isolation of alcoholism, I really needed other people around to kind of feel like I'm not crazy, because the responses are not in the normal vein of how people would respond when you grow up with any kind of addiction, right? So when I love interacting with others. Now, there are people who have the same issue as me who say, you know what, I'd rather do this alone. And both are very valid. So I just want to share that with you. Whatever that looks like to you is the right way to do it. And somebody put a comment on the page from last week's exercise. And I want to say about meditation. Meditation can be as simple as going for a walk, enjoying a moment with your dog or your cat, your pet, enjoying a moment in nature with someone. It can be as simple as allowing yourself to sit down and enjoy a cool drink on a warm day, watching the world go by. Meditation means a meditative state where nothing is being done but being with you. So I hope that gives you some insight. What I'd like to hear from you this week is, if you would, comment below about what's going on for you in terms of how you noticed the energy of Bahana Beige entering your life. And of course, what takeaway you experienced in this particular fable. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And we are going to talk about, we'll be talking about my favorite card, rejection. I'll see you then.